Well, if you're anything like me and prayer is a continual challenge for you, you will not want to miss this. Hey everybody, it's Mike from The Gracious Guest. TheGraciousGuest.org is the website, and I am here so thrilled today to be talking about prayer with someone who I personally know is very well qualified to do so, and that's Sister Geralyn Schmidt from the Diocese of Harrisburg. Before we do anything, though, I would be remiss if I didn't remind you, please subscribe to this channel right now. Like this video, share the podcast if you're listening on the audio version of it. That really helps get the channel noticed, helps get it spread, helps me continue this ministry. Give me some feedback if you want to hit me up over at the website, thegraciousguest.org. If you go to the contact form down on the bottom of the page, you can send me some information, some requests, some suggestions for topics that you might want to hear about, in addition to just let me know what you think about all of this content. So that's that. I met Sister years ago when she was actually doing a presentation had to do with technology because, among other things, she's the wide area network coordinator for the diocese. And I was leading a lot of youth ministry stuff and young adult ministry events at the time, and I thought she would be a great speaker to come and talk to us. So she's an artist. She is just someone who's wonderful to talk to about a host of subjects as it pertains to the faith. And make sure I don't get this wrong, I wrote it down here. She's primarily, these days, the director of formation for wives of men in the permanent diaconate. So for those of you who may not be familiar, in holy orders, we have the diaconate, we have the priesthood, the presbytery, and then the bishops, right? So the apostles' descendants as far as their office. And so the deacons, which is the initial sort of order within holy orders, there are in the Catholic Church, there's an order of permanent deacons who are very often married men. They're usually in their at least mid to late 30s. Usually they're older than that. They might have already adult children and that kind of thing. And they enter into formation to prepare to assist with various liturgical functions. They will read the gospel at Mass. They can perform certain blessings. They will preach homilies. They can do baptisms. There's all kinds of things that deacons do. The Greek word deacon, or the Greek word that deacon comes from, means servant. So they're basically, they assist in many ways throughout the ministry of the church. And the wives of men in this formation program oftentimes, it can be a real challenge for them. It can be a big change and transition. So this is a role that Sister performs, that Bishop Gaynor came up with for her to be able to assist them as they sort of, in parallel with their husbands going through this formation program, have a spiritual formation program of their own, because they're very much involved in that. So she's the director of formation for wives of men in the permanent diaconate formation program. She's also the coordinator for the formation of the ministry of spiritual directors. So she's really heading up the process of people, laypersons and priests and religious, to become trained spiritual directors in the Diocese of Harrisburg. So Sister is uniquely qualified, I think, to talk about a lot of this stuff. Most importantly of all, she loves Jesus like very few people I've ever met. And so I really wanted to reach out to her and talk to her. I didn't know about what at first. Sometimes in the past she's given me a list of things like, here's the things we could talk about. And there's like all these topics. And this time around, though, I asked her, and she gave me a very interesting topic for us to take a look at. So without further ado, let's jump over to this exclusive interview with Sister Geralyn Schmidt from the Diocese of Harrisburg on prayer. Check it out. Sister Geralyn, thank you so much for joining me here today.
It's my pleasure, Mike.
Yeah, and this is it's funny because of course I emailed you just saying if you're asking if you'd want to come back on. It's been a while, and and before, you've given me lists and stuff before. Here's different things we could talk about. And this time, I was excited or interested. My interest was piqued because you just mentioned this very specific selection from this text. And I'm going to link all of that in the show notes and everything for everybody. But so just for everyone's sort of awareness here, we're talking. It's key 3, connecting prayer with daily life, from Father Tobin's book, Father Eamon Tobin. Do I have that right?
That's right.
Okay. And I was doing a little background check here. I think he was from Ireland. I think he passed away earlier this year.
But he was working mostly in Florida, it looks like, at least for the last few decades, I think. So this and this book that we're looking at here today specifically was, I think it was published in 2017, if I got that right. 13 Powerful Ways to Pray. And there it is, yes. And for those of you listening to this and not watching the YouTube video, go to YouTube and subscribe. It's free, and then you can see stuff too. So you can get it both ways. But what do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about just how this book came across your radar, maybe first, or just?
There's a series. I don't know. My ministry calls me to do a lot of faculty retreats and parish retreats and days of recollection and even talks, and I was asked to do an hour and 15-minute presentation, which is not an easy thing to do.
Right.
You do need some background and some material on prayer. Okay, I've been a religious for 36 years, and prayer is not new to me, but not being so. It can't just be about Sister Geralyn. It has to be about experts, other experts, people with degrees behind their name rather than my community's initials. But so I picked this up, and there was a topic. The third key was intriguing to me. He uses two phrases which we don't really. I've never come across in any of my other readings on prayer. He used the term occupational prayer, and spousal prayer, and I was like, "Ooh, that's awesome!" To experience and to even to chew on those two notions of prayer.
Right. Yeah, and he right at the beginning, I have a couple things highlighted I can share, but he kind of kicks this off, because what's neat is when you introduced this to me, I didn't have anything to go on either, so it was fun to sort of dig in, like, okay, homework, So he says, most of us, particularly men, so I attach to that because this is true for me, but most of us, particularly men, have a tendency to compartmentalize life. Mm-hmm. We give sections of our day to work, family, and recreation, and only then do we allot to God a portion, too often a leftover portion, of our day. So that's just as far as a backdrop for those of you likely tuning into this wondering what we're talking about. That's just maybe framing it here a little bit. So what is he, maybe as an overview, what do you, your takeaway as far as just a intro here to how he's differentiating occupational versus spousal prayer, and then maybe we can get into maybe more of how to do this kind of thing as we go.
Okay, so at a very high level, occupational prayer is the prayers that we say, the rosary. It's more of the knee-jerk, kneel, stand type of thing, the knee-jerk ones, the blessing before we eat, or the blessing as the day begins, or, oh God, I have a really bad meeting, a really stressful meeting, please bless this meeting. Those prayers that we pray during the course of the day, it's tied into our work, our life. Those are what we do is what he calls occupational prayer.
Okay.
Now, spousal prayer, and this is a Sister Geralyn spit on that term. I had the great privilege of shadow surfing, which I never do, shadow surfing one time, and I came across a science program, a NOVA science program on the heart. And they had a living heart cell in a petri dish and a microscope attached to the computer, to the television. And a living heart cell pumps, which is pretty cool. And as they zoomed out, a whole bunch of heart cells are living, and they're all beating at the different rhythms until they touch. Huh. When they touch, they beat in unison.
Wow.
That's a great image for me about what spousal prayer is all about. Spousal prayer is when we take sacred time in our day. For me, it's the morning. Mm-hmm. And focus purely on the relationship, our relationship to God. Mm-hmm. It's when our hearts beat with the mystical heart of God as one. Now, that's ideal. That's mystical prayer in a sense.
Yeah.
And, we're all called, I believe, by our baptism to that type of relationship.
Right.
And it's a discipline. To have a relationship with anybody, you need to spend some time. You need some quality time, face-to-face, put the phone down, unplug,
Yeah.
and spousal prayer is the same way.
Do you think it's fair to say that it's there? What I like about it, and you had written in the margins, I always love that one. I love this with some of my teachers too, and I do it sometimes if I share a photocopy with somebody, and they can see like some of my margin notes. But you had highlighted the one part talking about the spiritual life is all life, and he goes through, like cooking, paying bills, driving to work, like this. It's not maybe the best phrase to use, but I think in very often our kind of American mentality of like a separation of church and state. It's like that finds its way, I think, into our daily lives where there's that separation of my religion and separation of my day-to-day life. But he's really getting at that there's God's presence, seeking to kind of break through at every moment. And you wrote down Mary and Martha, or Martha and Mary. And maybe, I don't know if you want to discuss that a little bit as far as just, and I don't know, not to put words in your mouth, I'm wondering if you might go here with it a little bit. I know for me, I've always felt not unsatisfied by that story because I've learned a lot about it and I love that story, but I think I think most of us have mostly heard like the takeaway of that story is that Martha was wrong and Mary was right, and I don't really think that's fair to Martha. I think we're seeing two sides of the same coin maybe here, but what do you think about those two in this context?
So there's a difference between, my foundress is Blessed Pauline of Mallinckrodt, and she talked about hands at work. One of her sayings, hands at work, but hearts with God. At that moment in which Jesus said to thwang to Martha over the head, saying, "Hello, what are you doing?" She forgot that her heart had to be focused on Christ in the midst of her activity.
Right.
It's not activity for activity's sake. It's not going around crazy because of the thing. But it's focus on what your hands are doing, but your heart and your love has to be focused on God.
Right. I almost wonder if it's, because I struggle really with we all struggle with prayer, I think, at least at some point or in some ways, and I think, I think that's probably good, if I'm just doing it rote and I think I've got it down, I'm probably missing something. And I think we see that probably with some of the Pharisees, for example, who have a very regimented kind of thing, and the regiment itself isn't maybe wrong, but they seem to have come to a point where they think that is God, or the routine is God, and they've missed the relationship. And so I wonder, where that line is. I know in my own life sometimes, like with Liturgy of the Hours or Rosary, for example, when I'm doing that, where sometimes I feel like I feel the Lord kind of inviting me out of it, or just to pause, or there's some insight, or there's something where I can kind of sense something like a impulse to maybe put it down for a second and follow a different line of prayer, but there's always that tension of like, well, no, I gotta finish it. Right? Like, no, I'm in the middle of this. And I mean, do you think that could sometimes be where he might be,
100%.
Through the occupational prayer might be drawing us into a spousal moment, and we have to be aware of that?
100%. 100%. And for like the prayers that we pray, like the Rosary and the Office, the Liturgy of the Hours, in my world it's called the Office, often, you don't pray alone. Even if you pray it alone in your room or your office, you're not praying it alone. You're praying it with the entire church. You're praying it as one cell in the mystical body of Christ. So, and that's why the Psalms are like joyful Psalms and really depressed Psalms, because those Psalms mimic the people of God.
Yeah.
So
it's funny. Do you have any? Do you have any stories that you'd be willing to share, just an insight as far as like an encounter with that reality, as far as like when maybe you weren't feeling something, or some insight you had into a particular psalm or prayer like that, where it maybe made you think of someone else who might be going through something or not?
Oh my gosh, yes. So very early in my religious life, I was praying the Office, and in the middle of one of the psalms, and this is in our mother house with 50 sisters praying the Office at once. antiphonally. The Holy Spirit said to me, "Are you willing?" And it was during Lent. "Are you willing to carry the cross for somebody this Lent?"
Yikes.
Do I? And they're reading. They're. I don't even know what psalm it was, but it was. And I'm like, do I have a choice?
Yeah.
And he said yes. And I'm like, okay, but I love you. And I said, fine. Oh my gosh, the world, like, prayer became like sand.
Oh my.
The sisters I was living with were irritating me to no end. Completely to no, like, life was miserable.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, wow, Simon of Cyrene really had a big problem.
Yeah.
You know? And that went on for weeks.
Yeah.
During liturgy on Good Friday, when I reverenced the cross and I bent over to kiss the corpus on the cross, I felt like 100-pound weight had lifted off my shoulders. I felt like skipping back to my pew, but didn't. Okay, wow, like, yeah. And maybe a week later, a sister friend of mine said, I don't know why I'm called to tell you this, but I am. I was really struggling with depression. And I had a sense that somebody was helping me carry that cross. Wow. Like, not only was I asked to do that, but like, come on, coincidence? Like, give me a break. And yeah, so
Wow.
Yeah, that was an awesome moment. And one that really taught me a very important lesson about we're all in this together. You know, and that has become almost trite because of COVID, but we are. We are.
Well, yeah, and I know, because I've shared this before. I don't know if I've shared it on this show before, but a priest years back was telling us when we were sort of struggling with, you know, the similar example, I guess, but as far as a reminder that it's with that kind of liturgical prayer, that it's prayer as the body, and he, it was actually two different priests that kind of getting at the same thing. One, when I was struggling with Psalm 88, which, you know, you have on Friday night with the Liturgy of the Hours, that miserably depressing Psalm 88, the prayer of a sick person. It's just, you know, I am a worm and no man, or no, I think that's from 22, but from 88, you know, is all of that stuff, like my one companion is darkness, I'm going down into the pit, like, it's just miserable. Like, you can't read it and be like, yay, you know, it's not an encouraging psalm at all, except for that it's a crying out to God, right? You know, but you don't see where it ends, so to speak. It's just very sad from beginning to end, really expressing this person's sorrow. And I was struggling because I was struggling with that, and a priest friend of mine told me that he was as well when he was in seminary, and he told his spiritual director, he's like, I'll tell you what he told me. I said, it's Friday night, I'm praying this, I don't feel like this. You know, the week's over, I'm going out with my friends tonight, you know, everything's going pretty well, I don't really have any serious, huge thing like this, I don't feel like this when I'm praying this. And he said his spiritual director just looked at him and just smiled and said, somebody does. You know, and it just this huge, like, oh, right, this isn't about me. It is and it isn't. It's about me in that, like, I'm truly being invited into this relationship and this experience, but it's not a me and Jesus thing to where it excludes others or you know, it doesn't take that into account.
And for me, that's a great image because, like Simon of Cyrene, Jesus needs Simon of Cyrene. Even though Jesus was focused on doing the will of the Father, Jesus needs Simon of Cyrene to carry the cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So our brothers and sisters, even if they don't believe, they need us to pray for them. They do.
Well, you know, let me, something just came to mind here with this, with the reading here, because I have it off to the side here, because this was something I want to maybe ask you, I didn't want to forget to ask you this, to shift gears a little bit, because by the same token, you know, we're kind of thinking here about prayer in not a categorical kind of look to prayer where, there's like this time I set aside for God, and then the rest of the day is whatever I want to do. So like we know we want to avoid that, or that mentality. But he does say here, it's interesting because he's emphasizing, I guess if I read him right, Father Tobin is emphasizing the intentionality, maybe like the importance of meaning it, maybe, when I pray, whenever that time is. And he says, this is on page 49, he says, when everything is prayer, and he's quoting actually the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops' Spiritual Renewal in the American Priesthood document. And he says, when everything is prayer, nothing is prayer, and without prayer we perish. When we attempt to find God everywhere but in no particular place, we tend to find him nowhere. Those who pray on the job also need to enter their room and pray to their Father in secret. And so it looks like he's sort of taking aim at that maybe quick to kind of quote notion I think a lot of people have, where like, well, I just sort of pray all the time, and it's just sort of like a vague, vacuous kind of statement. But I guess I'm struggling a little bit with, how do you balance that though with like what St. Paul says about in 1 Thessalonians, he talks about pray without ceasing. So I don't know, maybe there's not really a big distinction there maybe, but I'm just wondering what you think about that.
It's all love. So
okay.
God is love, okay? And we hear that ad nauseum sometimes, and we forget what that means. But think about the little flower, okay? Mm-hmm. So I'm not just not Sister Geralyn speaking here. The little flower says if you pick up a woolly and do it with love, you empty out purgatory. So, as a conscious effort, when I begin to do something, all for thee. All for thee. That 30-second prayer, 5-second prayer, my hands, what I need to do when I need to focus on something, it's for him. That's praying without ceasing. So it's not like spending your entire life, glued to a pew in front of the Blessed Sacrament. No, because Paul did say those who do not work should not eat. Like, work is
Right.
is very important. Work is holy, but
Yeah.
it's the intention. It's your hands are work. Your heart is on God. It's what Martha forgot at that very moment that Jesus reminded him.
Right.
Does that help?
It does. I think so. That makes sense.
I mean, you think of oh heck, I'm having a brain freeze. I can see his face. The newest saint, teenage saint, who was a
Carlo Acutis.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah.
He was all about that. He was all about that. 100% all about working, whatever you're doing, do it for the love of God.
Right. Yeah. So that intent, and I think I'm trying to remember. Sometimes it doesn't matter where you heard something, right? I guess I think I wouldn't call myself a scholar per se, but I have an academic inclination. So there is part of me that's always wanting to cite everything. Sometimes I think I respect when the church fathers would very often just say, somewhere it is written, and it's like, okay.
Somewhere I read.
Right, so that aside. So I don't remember who said this exactly, but and I think it was one of my professors actually in my grad program, I just thought made a very good and simple observation that prayer, that devotion and attention is basically, that was his argument, that's the key. Do you love God? That's piety, I think, in a nutshell. It's I'm not doing it primarily because I'm afraid. Even like the one prayer in the confessional, right? The one act of penance, where I fear the fires of hell and all this kind of stuff. But which is good to fear that, to avoid that. But that shouldn't be. That's this. We want to move from that servile fear to the filial kind of fear of God. So the devotion, that I'm growing, because I can't just do it like that, but God's helping me grow in my capacity to pray in an atmosphere of just love. I'm just doing it because I love Him, and I'm jotting this down because I keep coming across this phrase all over the scriptures lately of delight yourself in the Lord. And I think there's like Psalm 37, Psalm 84, there's Sirach, there's all these places I keep seeing that phrase, so that's a new little line for me. So how maybe let me just throw that one to you. How do you, because this might be unfair, because I know you, and this could go down a whole other path, but give a maybe example yesterday or today of a way that maybe you delight in the Lord, or just little ways maybe for people who maybe haven't heard that before, like just that simple devotion.
Okay, so delight for me is joy.
Mm.
Okay, and joy comes from lived hope. Like
okay.
Hope focused on there's a being greater than you who's got all the answers. You don't have to rack your brain. You know, who loves you so much that was willing to suffer and die for you.
Hmm.
And we stand at every liturgy at the foot of the cross at that gift. And he gives it to us so that we can experience not only the mystical heart beats the heart, but for 15 minutes after communion, the divine body and soul, blood and divinity of Christ and your body is one. And the mystics talk about not just you and God, but you and everybody receiving at that liturgy is one. So their joys become your joys, their sorrow becomes your sorrows, and vice versa.
Yeah.
That's reality.
Yeah.
That's not a pious, that's reality. That's not a pious thought no, that's real.
Yeah. It's funny you should mention that, because I just read something recently that was really hitting that home again, the idea that it's the sacrament that as we receive it, we become it, and then, like that reciprocal kind of thing, that it makes the church, and it is the church, and that's just so profound.
But there's the light. There's the delight. Like the whole of creation echoes that. If we just take a second to rejoice.
Lived joy, I like that. Huh. Well, and what's funny? This might be a good segue, because we got a couple minutes left here. I think that might be a good segue to that last section, unless, and interrupt me by all means.
That's fine.
But the last section where he talks about, I love the title of it, the pretexts for not integrating. It's just a great little title. But he lists, I'll just mention them quick, and then I don't know if you want to pick anyone in particular, or just as far as, advice or tips or anything for, maybe not all of them, but maybe the top one or two as you see it that might be a challenge for people, or a common excuse for people to not, even if they're doing halfway decent occupational prayer, that's sort of moving into spousal prayer. So it's, I'm too busy. I fall into that one myself plenty of times. Formal or spousal prayer is just for priests and religious and very dedicated lay people, but not for the ordinary Catholic. That's the second one he mentions. Third one, I'd have no idea how to spend 20 minutes of quiet time with the Lord. Number 4, I used to have a daily quiet time, but I quit because I was making no progress and was going nowhere. And then the last two, right? Take a number. No, I don't want to get too serious about prayer. This is my favorite one. I don't want to get too serious about prayer because consciously or unconsciously, I'm afraid of losing control over my life. And that, I think, dovetails into his last one. I don't want to listen too closely to God in prayer because I'm afraid of what the Lord might say to me.
I love you. That's what he'll say. And that's completely disarming. So
isn't that what Jonah did?
Yes.
Right? He's like, God's like, I want you to go do something. And he goes exactly the opposite direction. So you're in good company, I guess, maybe on that one. But so do you have any tips on any of those or observations?
They're just fabulous. So prayer, and I say this is as important as brushing your teeth or taking a shower. So if you skip prayer, you might as well not brush your teeth. You might as well not shower.
How's your soul smell? Right?
That's what, one priest I know talks about the sacrament of reconciliation as the moment of he's a garbage man.
Yeah. 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 Good.
So, but as far as being afraid or, you're afraid that you listen to God and God's calling you to do something, that's immaturity. Because I have chewed on this from the Epistle of St. John. Perfect love casts out all fear. So your love isn't perfect yet. What are you afraid of? That God's going to call you to do something that you can't do? Well, he won't call you and then leave you alone. He'll call you and provide you the grace or the wherewithal to do that. I mean, perfect example. I'm a formation director for the Wives of the Permanent Diaconate. And when I was asked to do that by Father Shank, via Bishop by Father Shank, I said to Father Shank, how am I qualified? He said to me, you're as qualified as the apostles were.
Yeah.
Like, hello? Right?
When you put it that way.
I go to my provincial, and she said the same thing. How are you qualified? And I said, well, sister, I'll tell you what I was told. And she went, how did you refute that? I went, bingo!
Yeah.
And it's been just amazing. It's been just amazing.
I feel like there's even a layer we sometimes miss with that qualification thing. Because, the old, it's a bit of a trotted out kind of thing, maybe almost on the level of a trope to some people, but I think it's absolutely true that, that God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called, But I love that you mentioned that because, if and I'm sure some folks certainly listening to this are aware of this connection already, but in, when Jesus calls Peter, there's clearly that imagery being made there back to the Old Testament, to the office that was in the kingdom of David for the householder, right? The guy over the whole city. And so what's amazing to me is even if in the moment that Jesus is calling Peter doesn't have any idea how big the big picture is, right? He doesn't know where this is all headed yet. But even if it's just that Jesus is the new king, right? The new son of David, and he's reestablishing the kingdom, and he's going to make David that. And what he makes David is way bigger than that. But even that, like, what's his qualification? He's a fisherman. He's a Galilean fisherman being called to be the new royal steward of the new kingdom of Judah.
Really
even if it was just that.
He's a fisherman who can't swim.
Right. And he's apparently not that great at fishing. Aside. So, by the way, I love, my wife and I love The Chosen. We've been watching that, and I love how they keep making fun. I don't know if you've seen it, but they keep making fun of they'll slip it in here or there, making fun of Simon Peter's inability to run very well or fast. Because, they're seasons away yet from the crucifixion and the resurrection, but he's like, yeah, Lord, you should see the way he runs. Because they're, like, to just establish that already, that when he and John run to the tomb, John's going to beat him there is just a cute little detail. But that aside, well, I'll tell you what, sister, we have about a minute or two here left, and then we'll kind of have to bring it to a close, at least for now. But maybe just in closing, so occupational versus spousal prayer. Obviously, this whole book I'm going to have linked in the notes for people to get their hands on if they want to do that. But what would maybe be your big takeaway, or something someone listening today might be able to try today? Where to start maybe with this?
Ooh, where to start? That's a good. Well, start with occupational. Start with reading scripture. Start with a rosary. Start with going to mass and being aware of what's going around you, of what's being said, of the actions, the symbols, and make it conscious. Just don't, like veg out at that moment, space out. Get a spiritual friend. Find a spiritual director. Call me, and I'll give you a list of spiritual directors in your area.
There you
go. And you can put my name and my contact information in the link as well.
Yep, I'll do that as well, yeah.
That's part of my ministry here for the diocese. But don't be afraid to talk about God's love. Because Jesus hungers for you. That's why that picture in the background is so, I love it. Because Jesus is giving you his heart, and he wants you to give him yours.
Yeah. Well said. Well, thank you so much, sister, for coming on today. We'll definitely have to do this again, and there's no shortage of topics for sure.
Oh, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
So thank you very much for coming on, and we'll make sure to share all those links. So
Okay.
God bless you.
God bless you, Mike.
That was a blast. It really was. And hopefully you got some good insights there. Now, as I mentioned in the interview, if you look in the show notes here in the video or the podcast, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening to the podcast, either way, you'll see down there below Sister's contact information if you want to get in touch with her about any of that stuff. The link for Father Tobin's book as well is on there. And then just some other goodies for you, as usual. So please make sure you guys like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, whatever format you're using for your podcast, or a video vodcast, I think they call it. Vidcast maybe? That makes more sense. Again, however you get this content, however you like to get it, please go ahead and subscribe, please follow. I'm also back on Twitter, which is a whole other thing. So at Mike Creevy, you can find me over there. I'm just sharing Bible quotes and inspirational things, because we all need a little bit more of that for sure. So God bless you guys until next time. Don't forget to wonder. Take care.